And also would like to extend thank yous to our cooperators always on these research projects. It's done at the behest of the landowner and the cooperating contractors. Bateman Enterprises, Mancurler Logging were the cooperators on this studs project. Also, we had obviously support from the Siuslaw National Forest staff, financial and other support from the Pacific Northwest Research Station with Paul Anderson and Dennis Dykstra, and then also cooperation with Doug McGuire, Doug Manwaring, and others from Oregon State University. So some observations on the harvest operations with respect to residual stand and also the planted understory damage, and really going to focus on that second aspect. And this again is coming out of the studs research, the Siuslaw National Forest project that we worked on. And if you can, keep in mind some of the talks that were given maybe in session 1 with Klaus and Mike Newton on some of the work they've done. Think about the second session. There was some snag recruitment and stand damage aspects there, and then also leading into the following talks that will come right after break. So this was a Siuslaw thinning and understory for diversity, the studs project that Lauren alluded to. 3 study sites, Cataract down by Mapleton, the Yachats, and then the Wildcat, which was up on the Hebo district. First entry was in 93-94 at age 35. Treatments were reduced, as Lauren indicated, down to 30, 60, and 100 trees per acre. The second entry was in 2008-2009 at age 50, and the 2 stands, the 60 residual and the 100 residual, were then treated only on the second treatment, second entry. Lauren talked about the Hansu Ponds efforts with respect to Dam Quick and our findings that within 15 feet of the center line of the corridor is where a lot of this stand damage occurred to the residuals. And I want to keep that in mind as we talk about residuals in terms of planted understory. And then the detailed time studies, which again, not enough time to go into the details there, but that data and results are out there. So here's a picture from the Yahat sites in the 60 trees residual prior to our second thinning efforts. If you look into the background down to the, down into this, that's kind of an indication, although that's a riparian leaf area, that's a kind of indication of what the control unit looked like. Even 15 years later, it wasn't much larger than the 11 inches that it was at age 35. So here's just some quick numbers, just to give you an idea. Just want to look at the 3 sites, Cataract, Yachats, Hebo, 60 trees per acre, 100 trees per acre. All were 50 years old, and here's kind of the quadratic mean diameters of those stands at entry, and then the heights there for the 3 treated stands. And based on the crews, pre-harvest crews, we were looking to have a few cut trees, and then you can see what's projected residual harvest is for the 60 and 100 treatments after this entry. Dave Marshall indicated, focusing on individual tree growth versus stand growth. I love this picture here. So if we go from about 4 inches there across to, I think that's about 14, 15. So we're at that 11 inches that it was at 35. So this is a cut stump at age 50. And we went from 11 inches to about 18 inches on this specific tree. 7 inches diameter growth in 15 years. And when you think about a forester and individual tree growth, this really gets me excited. But then also when you think about stand growth, I'm pretty tight with the wallet, and so I'm also looking to kind of maximize volume growth with return to the dollar. But as Dave alluded to, as a forester, we manage by objectives. And there's some other objectives in this study, and that's the understory success. So looking just quickly, this is kind of a typical scar, about 6 inches long, 2 or 3 inches wide. We call it a scar if it broke through an exposed cambial layer, if the bark was impacted, but we still had cambial protection. We didn't consider that a scar. And as Lauren alluded to, what you determine, what you consider to be a significant scar, so we can say any scar greater than 24, so about the size of your shirt pocket, about the 72 inches, about the size of a sheet of paper, or 144 square inches, a foot square. And you can apply those, look at the results from the 3 sites, the 2 treatments, 60 and 100 residual, and you can see that we range anywhere from about 5% low. I mean, some of them were as low as 2 and 3%, up to about 5%, and then there's this case here. For brevity, that really shows contractor experience, contractor conscientiousness, use of lift, getting high enough with their system, their skyline, to get that front of that log off the ground and away from trees. In this case, they had very little lift. They brought in contour felling, so they had to turn those logs 90 degrees to the corridors. So 90 degrees if you were to exit that aisle and then make a 90-degree turn to exit out the building, very difficult to do. So as Lauren alluded to, planning and execution of the plan is very important. Okay, here's another star. This would kind of fit all 3 categories. We had greater than 4 inches, we had over 144 square inches, and if it broke through what we consider the root collar, we call that root damage. So a greater chance for infection by decay-causing organisms the lower you are on the stem. And so just breaking out the results there, scar width, root damage, crown damage, and or scars greater than 144. And you can see that you have lower incidence rates based on what your criteria. Stand damage here was a failure to secure a lift tree. This was a tail tree. They failed to use guy lines, and during the harvesting operation, they snapped the tree over. So this is a great, depending on how you look at it, it's a failure of the system, one, with respect to safety. There was crews operating on this corridor. 2, in terms of productivity and cost, efficiency, this is just going to cause delays, more cost, lower productivity. You can see the unharvested, unyarded timber behind it. And 3, if you like snag recruitment, okay, you got one. So it's all in perspective. So when we talk about protection, prevention of damage to mortality to planted trees, we're really talking about the felling activity first. With respect to underplantings, our experience was don't plant your trees, your seedlings, closer than 12 feet to the residual trees. Because when that faller comes in for the second entry, he's going to have to get to the tree. He's going to need to see beyond that tree to see where his lay is going to be. He'll need to put in face cuts and back cuts, and OSHA mandates that he have escape routes 45 degrees to opposite directions for 25 feet behind the tree. Okay, felling activities. Again, don't plant closer than 12 feet. Don't plant a cable corridor. We said that a lot of the damage occurs within 15 feet of the center line, so it does make a lot of sense that we're going to harvest these trees and bring them back into the corridor, that if we had planted understory planting, second cohort, if you will, 15 feet away from the corridor, use that herringbone felling pattern and yarding pattern. Try to fell multiple stems to the same lay. Require limbing prior to yarding. In this case, one feller did not limb. Think of a tree growing in 60 trees per acre residual, large crowns, wide crowns, and in many cases limbs that were stouter than the planted residual trees, which were only about 15 feet tall. Those logs come out like this. You can imagine the swath of damage that they can incur. Log lengths. A lot of the operators are used to working in clear cuts, using tree length or second log attached, and then stroke the limbers or some kind of processor at the landing. It doesn't work in thinnings. You have to bring them out in log lengths. Yarding activities. Again, do not plant in the yarding corridor. Fell regeneration that's in the corridor. We had both natural, alder coming up in the old corridors, and planted trees. The contractor thought he could just yard through it. What he found was, as the logs went up, they would spring off some of these residual trees and impact trees on the side of the corridor, causing damage. He also thought when his carriage would slide back the other way, without inadequate lift, chokers dangling would get tangled in these treetops, and then he'd have delays in his yarding cycle. Again, required delimbing, use the herringbone pattern, use that for lateral yarding as well to get them to the corridor, and again, can't emphasize enough the log lengths. So, yarding activities, avoid the 90-degree turns into the corridor. You get tail sweep, and that's going to take out some underplanted trees. You get a leading edge of the logs. If you don't choke it at the end, they're going to cross the corridor. As you try to get this 40-foot log into the corridor, it may go beyond the other side. Rub trees, rubbing residuals or wiping out the planted trees again. Lift trees. If we're planning to do multiple entries, we need to protect the lift trees in terms of using guy lines and rigging straps. Synthetics. We've done a lot of studies with synthetic ropes now that these synthetic straps are easy, light. There's no excuse for saying it's just too onerous in terms of workload on the contractor. These ropes are light. They're easy to get up and down the hill, very easy to get up and down the tree. While there's some things as federal or state agencies, public agencies, you can't mandate in the contract, but certainly you can put some things in contract language and or contract enforcement. Here, again, is a beautiful indication of snag recruitment. This was a tree that was used as a lift tree 15 years ago at the first entry. Right there, you can see where the steel cable went around the tree, girdled it, made a nice snag. As Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story was when they came back in on the same corridor, there was no lift tree. This was an intermediate support tree. So the carriage, you saw a picture of Lauren's carriage many feet up in the sky. When the carriage went by this tree, because there was no lift tree here, it was about, the bottom of the carriage was this far off the ground. So you can imagine that was essentially ground lead logging. It was just terrible for terms of productivity, terrible in terms of stand damage, just a bad situation. We asked the contractor some of his observations. To limb 3/4 of the surface of the stem, he had a felling contractor work for him who kind of just went through as much as he could walk to get up the stem is all he took off. Then he had these lateral limbs like this, and it was like Velcro trying to come out through those stands. These long lateral limbs just slow to pull out and cause quite a bit of damage. 12-foot wide corridors, cut the regeneration, that was his own fault. He admitted it, says, look, I should have felled those trees instead of trying to get through them. Yarding crew, they got to be conscientious too. Some logs went up sideways, especially small tops and small logs. They went up this way. Everything goes up cleanly this way. That's a certain with extraction. And when they get airplane like this, they just whack everything. So there was a question earlier, where's that sweet spot? And now this is just my opportunity, my personal feelings. We seem to have booked in, at least in this study, between 60 and 100 trees per acre with respect to underplanting development, success and vigor, volume growth, smaller limb size on a residual, productivity and cost, and other diversity attributes. So there seems to be an opportunity to come up from 60 and somewhere down between 100, because at 100 we had seedlings this tall, still in Vexar. They survived, and then in part due to elk browse, but they weren't growing any taller than this, under the 100, not enough light. But under the 60, as a forester, it was exciting to go out there and see something we had done. Underplanted, we had trees that were 15, 20 feet tall. We had the second cohort. We had an overstory stand, just really exciting from a forestry viewpoint. And then we have opportunities, I think, to improve both tree growth and these other attributes. At this point, I don't want to keep you further from your snacks, but I'm willing to answer any questions.